A lot of time has passed now since the game's released, and with changing times we might also want to reconsider how good every single character in the game actually is. So let's figure out today on November 23rd how good is actually every single character in the game, specifically talking about the 5-star characters. Now I'm just going to go down the list and I'm going to tell you with each of these characters what sort of tier I think they're into, and I'm going to go by the following metrics. How many situations are they good in? And in those situations where they are good, how good are they in those situations? I'm not going to go by who's going to score the highest in just score attack, because that's going to be a very different tier list from, for example, who's best at going through nightmare mode, for example. So I'm trying to combine all of that into one list to tell you, just generally, if you have a character and you just put them on any random team for any possible amount of content you can think of, are they going to perform well or not? We're going to start right out with a character, and I think this is the release list in reverse order. We have right here Alina, the Halloween version. It's going to be the worst character in the entire game right now, and I don't think it's going to change at any time. Because here's the thing, there's going to be 2 other fire attackers down there, and both of those fire attackers are going to place much, much higher on this list in such a way that in any situation, I would much rather have the other fire attackers compared to Halloween Alina. The only thing that she really has is being able to apply some damage over time, but very weak damage over time that doesn't actually synergize with any other damage over time characters. I made an entire guide about that. In fact, I've made a guide about every single character in here. To hear my thoughts about all of these, you can just go to my channel, which you can see below. It should be on my channel, and you can just check out every single guide video for any of these characters to get a deeper insight into what I think of them. But the main problem with Halloween Alina is that she doesn't synergize with damage over time in any way, and if you take that away, the only thing she has is just being a really, really bad attacker that is worse than any other attacker in the game. So that already means that she's not going to be very helpful. Now next up we have Halloween Mummy, and as far as Halloween Mummy is concerned, she's a debuffer who is extremely good at amplifying the damage that your team does to a single character. She's kind of one-dimensional as a character and also as a unit, and because she doesn't really do that much other than damage amplification, because she's trying to do damage over time stuff, right? But the damage over time stuff that she does is not really that powerful and is not likely to actually be that synergistic with more characters in the future, but it's possible that some future characters may potentially synergize with her, but I don't really see it that much. But as far as at least the damage amplification is concerned, she's pretty good, but she's single target, she's limited, and there is an unlimited debuffer that is a lot more powerful, even though she's A rank, and that character is going to be an S rank. And because that other character, that is, in my opinion, overall the better package, is unlimited, but Halloween Mummy is limited, that does put a dampener on her, and also the fact that her special gimmick being dot stuff, which is currently not really that well used in the game, I think that puts her down a little bit. Next up is Mifuyu. Now Mifuyu, I almost want to put in S rank, but we haven't really seen enough of her yet. I'm going to put her at the very top of S rank, maybe bottom of, very top of A rank, potentially bottom of S rank, I'm not quite sure, because we need to see her power when she's Ascension 5, but not many people have her Ascension 5 yet. My guess is that the more Ascensions people get on Mifuyu, the more people will see that she could potentially be a top S tier character, but right now it is a bit too early to tell. The main drawback that she has is that she only really works well in a crit-oriented team, right? That's the one thing that's holding her back, and also the fact that she's single target, but that's not that big of a deal, to be fair. But in a single target environment, on a team that has high crit rate, she is absolutely incredibly busted beyond belief, and is easily the best breaker in the game in single target scenarios where you have a crit team, right? But how powerful exactly she's going to be in those situations, we can only really tell once we get her at higher ascensions, so we're going to have to wait until we get better information on Mifuyu. Next up we have Mitama. Mitama as a healer immediately I have to put in B, because healers generally have a bit of a problem right now, and that is that defenders just generally have an easier time keeping the team alive while not needing as many skill points in as many situations, and having some other types of interesting utilities, like Shirika maybe has some cool stuff, maybe Sayaka has some cool stuff in there, just saying that. So healers are having a bit of a trouble right now. There's also a lot of bosses, once you get really, really powerful bosses, that will kill your team very quickly before your healers can heal. So there's some things that are holding healers back generally, and there are just very strong defender options that do basically what healers want to do, which is keep the party alive, but also do other cool stuff. That said, Mitama specifically, she is able to get rid of debuffs, which is extremely important on a lot of boss fights, and she has damage reduction for your team, which is also really nice. So both of those things make her a really good choice for healer. In my opinion, maybe even the best healer, not quite sure on that, but I'm going to put her in B tier for now. I'm going to move on to a Bohomura. Now, Bohomura, I almost wanted to put in S rank because she's extremely good. The main problem I see with her is that she's limited, and most of her power comes from Ascensions, because her Ascension 2 and her Ascension 4, she actually has a very special Ascension 4 that is different than other attackers' Ascension 4, are extremely powerful, and you kind of need to have those Ascensions because she gets so much more power out of having the crit rate that you get from those Ascensions, because once you have the crit rate, you can get to 100% crit rate without needing a crit buffer, and once you get to that point, you can then play without any other buffer or without any other character that increases crit rate, and for example have only a Mabayu and a Ren standing next to her, with both of which don't buff crit rate, but because you're going to crit all the time anyway, you can still invest heavily into crit damage and play still a full crit damage lineup with Mabayu buffs, with Ren debuffs, which is insanely powerful. But because she's limited and all of that is locked behind really high Ascensions, that in my opinion knocks her down quite a bit, because it's a lot harder to actually get her at high Ascensions. You'd have to wait for reruns and then also get lucky a bit. That does put a bit of a dampener on everything, so that's why I knocked her down a little bit. But just if she was unlimited, easy S rank, easy S rank. Next up is Mel, who in my opinion is also an absolutely fantastic choice. As far as breakers go, she breaks really fast. She is very light on SP usage. Now, it doesn't sound that way because she takes 3 SPs at once to get started, but once she gets started, she then gives you another SP on that turn, and then the turn afterwards gives you another SP back. So you spend 3 SP on one turn, but then also gain 2 SP back on those 2 turns. So overall, she's not actually as SP negative overall across an entire fight as it might seem, and is actually easier on the SP drain compared to other breakers. But because she takes 3 SP to get going, it is possible to accidentally mess it up if you are not paying attention, and that can put a drawback on her. Also, the fact that some of her utility that comes outside of breaking is increasing forest damage, and there's not many forest DPS right now. That does put another dampener on it as well, but generally she's a very powerful breaker option. Next up we have Sakurako. Now Sakurako has something that she's struggling with, which is the fact that she's full AoE Aqua type, and there's one other Aqua attacker that is really good in single target. That's Yachio, of course, and that character, of course, Yachio, is stronger than her in single target. And when it comes to multi-target, there is a limited character, but that limited character that I'm going to talk about is AoE Aqua and way better than Sakurako. And even though the character is limited, that still does put another dampener on the thing. So she's in an element that just has really strong competition on the attacker front and loses to both of them in an overall sense. So both the other attackers, I'd rather overall play those 2 characters compared to Sakurako, and just because there are better options, I'm gonna have to knock her down a little bit. That said, as a support Kioku, she's fantastic. She's one of the best support Kioku in the game for support ability, so she's still very good for that. But outside of that, I don't know how good she actually performs on field compared to those other options. Next up we have Ui, which is our first S tier character. Buffers generally are extremely overpowered, probably the best role in the entire game, and the main reason for that is that the Ascension 4 bonus for buffers is way too overpowered. Like, both giving 50% stronger buffs and getting a skill point back on special is so incredibly busted. Either of these by themselves would already make Buffer Ascension 4 the best Ascension in the game, but it's both, which is exactly as overpowered and busted as you think it is. So already, I'm going to tell you right now, every single buffer is up there. Every single buffer is going to be in S tier. Because Ascension 4 is just so damn powerful. Now, of course, if there was a limited buffer, then because they're limited, it might be harder to get to Ascension 4, which might knock them down a peg. But every single buffer we have in the game is unlimited, it's standard, so You will over time get them all to Ascension 4 at least, and at that point they're all extremely fucking busted just by getting SP back, just by having so many powerful buffs. It's insane. So we specifically, she has the special playstyle where she basically just doesn't need to take a turn after having used her special, so you can build her really slow, right? You can just have her really slow with really high MP bonus, and what happens is whenever other characters deal damage and take turns, Ui just gets more specials, so she doesn't have to do anything. She just watches the fight and gets specials, and every single one of those specials gives you a skill point back if she's Ascension 4, not to mention that her damage buffs that she gives to the party are extremely powerful, and with Ascension 4 also those buffs become extremely powerful as well. Now before Ascension 4, she's only okay-ish. Like without Ascension 4, she's maybe an A rank, but once you hit Ascension 4, which because she's standard, she will at some point, she's absolutely busted. Or easy S tier. Next up we have Holy Mummy, which is our other D tier character. Once again, we have the problem with an attacker that is just outclassed by other attacker options that also came before and everyone just has at this point. Like, if you already have a cool Homura with just a couple of Ascensions, there's no reason at all to play Holy Mummy. Now, they might say, oh, but if you have 5 enemy targets, then Holy Mummy might be better than cool Homura, right? Except not really. Especially because you're probably going to have more Ascensions and better Crystallers and just more build on your Cool Homura, which that by itself makes Cool Homura way better because the difference between the two is not very big on 5 target scenarios. But the thing is also, the way that Holy Mummy's AoE works is that it has these random hits that appear, which spread out across the enemy, but don't have to. And the main problem you have with that is that usually you're not trying to damage all 5 enemies. Like, either you're trying to damage all 5 enemies equally, or you have a priority target, right? And if you have a priority target, Homura being cleave and having a central hit is actually better. But if you're trying to spread the damage out evenly, Holy Mummy doesn't even do that. Holy Mummy doesn't even do that because these have these random hits that go whenever, and it might just randomly kill off some random guy. And once some random guy gets killed off, or 2 random guys get killed off, the amount of enemies shrinks from 5 enemies to 3 enemies to 2 enemies to 1 enemies. And at that point, Holy Mummy falls off really, really hard. Like, once there's only 1 enemy left on the team, on the enemy team, Holy Mummy does nothing. She might as well just go home. Like, imagine there's a boss with 4 ads, and you might say, oh, Holy Mummy is really good at killing those ads. But once the ads are dead, Holy Mummy becomes, I don't know, like useless, absolutely useless. Meanwhile, Homura just gets started and just keeps follow-up attacking, keeps getting specials, keeps just dealing high amounts of damage. There's just no reason for Holy Mummy. Moving on, we have Swimsuit Sayaka, who I think is the only, the only out of 2. There's only 2 limited characters they're going to put in S tier, and Swimsuit Sayaka is one of them. Now, you might argue that because she's limited and it's hard to get Ascensions, that maybe you should knock it down a little bit. But I think even at Ascension 0, Swimsuit Sayaka is just insanely powerful, and if Swimsuit Sayaka was standard, she would actually be close to the top of S tier. Swimsuit Sayaka is just not that goddamn fucking good. Why is that? Well, she has the regular debuffer damage increase that you get from reducing enemy defense. That's great and all. But more importantly, what she has is a unique debuff that no one else in the game has right now, which is the increased break gauge depletion taken from enemies. So you put that on an enemy, and now they take more break gauge depletion, which I think is about 20%, which even goes higher if you have her at Ascension 4, which is hard because she's limited. But at least 20% breakage depletion, which is really darn high. Like, enemies break like an entire turn earlier just with that debuff, which is an insane thing that no other debuffer in the game can do, and it's insanely powerful. On top of all of that, like that by itself is already like worthy of at least A tier. But what makes her S tier is that she's also extremely high damage, like absurdly high damage. She has the highest attack in the game outside of attackers, I think. Halloween Mummy might be close, but she has extremely high attack for being not an attacker. And in fact, her attack is so high that she actually beats some attackers on damage. Like, I think my Swimsuit Sayaka, okay, she's A5 because I got really lucky, like extremely lucky. But my Swimsuit Sayaka easily beats my A2, I think Ascension 2, I think she is, Sakurako, like easily. It's not even a contest, like how easily my swimsuit Sayaka blows Sakurako out of the water. Sakurako should have been forest type. If she was, she would have been at least A rank. And some other characters might be higher rank as well. But because your swimsuit Sayaka both does the damage amplification from being a debuffer, both has the break gauge depletion reduction, and does insane damage as well. And on top of all of that, if that wasn't good enough, she's fully area of effect. She hits every enemy. So it's not just 1 or 2 or 3 enemies, it's every enemy on top of that. Like, she has everything. She basically has everything. There's not one thing she's lacking, and that is kind of absurd that you have one character just bringing everything to the table. So yeah, that's what makes it an absolutely absurd and busted character. Next up, we have Swimsuit Madoka. I'm gonna put right next to the healers. Spoiler alert, all the healers are going to be right here, like right next to each other. So, Swimsuit Madoka is better than I originally gave her credit for, which comes down to the fact that she got released alongside or very close to the Crystallis system, and it turns out the Crystallis system does a lot of making up for Swimsuit Madoka's shortcomings. That shortcomings being that her heals are kind of bad, like her heals are not really that strong. But with Crystallis, you can kind of get around that, right? And it's specifically important for Swimsuit Madoka to have strong heals because she gets bonus damage increases for the team if people, when they get healed or after the healing, have high HP. So of course you need your healing to be strong so that characters can be on high HP after the heal, right? So that's why it's really important, and Crystallis help out a lot because you can equip her EX Crystallis, which gives even more buffs. You can give her the Crystallis for increased healing, for damage reduction with guard, for example. You can just give her the substats healing increase, right? And that makes her have so much healing that it actually becomes a lot easier to keep people on high HP. And when people are on high HP, they get damage bonuses from Swimsuit Madoka, which sort of helps her out actually doing what she wants to do. And if she can do that, if she can keep people alive, give people shields, then she's actually an extremely powerful option. Some people might say, oh, maybe she's better than Mitama, maybe Mitama is better. It's kind of between those two on who, in my opinion, is the best healer, but they both definitely are, in my opinion, doing a really good job at both keeping the team alive. Mitama with her damage reduction, that is pretty unique. And on top of that, and with the debuff removal, and Swimsuit Madoka with the shields and the passive heal as well, and both of them also give you some damage increase for the team as well. So both keeping the team alive, both having damage increase, pretty darn good. Now, depending on how many Ascensions you have, I will have to say the following. If you have Ascension 4 on a healer, that healer immediately becomes A tier. Now, you might say, oh, but I put buffers in S tier because of their A4, but buffer A4 is just that fucking busted, okay? But specifically, if you have a healer at A4, that in my opinion does bump them up like an entire tier, but before then, and in some cases even with Ascension 4, I'd rather have defenders. Like, just whenever I play the game and I do hard content, right, when I do score attack 50, or when I do chaos bosses, right, or the newest nightmare boss, okay, they're usually not that hard, but whenever I do really hard content like new chaos bosses, I'd rather have defenders than healers basically all the time. And whenever I try to mix around, whenever I try to swap in a healer, usually it doesn't end well, but my Kirika has never let me down so far, and that's that. But yeah, but aside from that, as far as healers go, Swimsuit Madoka, specifically with a good Crystallis setup, absolutely great. Next up we have Swimsuit Mummy, because there aren't enough mummies yet. So she is, in my opinion, in around the bottom of A tier. Now she is pretty powerful, right? Don't get me wrong, and as far as forest attackers goes, she's the only one. But because she's limited, it's not that easy to get many ascensions of her, and specifically attackers really like getting ascensions because attackers get base attack with ascensions, right? And base attack scales with damage really, really highly. Like, just a little bit more base attack gives you a lot more damage, right? So that little bit of base attack you get just from ascensions is extremely important. Not to mention that, of course, getting more levels on your special is also extremely important for your attackers so that the special deals as much damage as possible. And with being limited, that does put a really big dampener on things, which is also why Bo Homura is not in S tier. Now that said, she's your only option for forest damage. So she can't be lower than A tier in my opinion, because if you have her, she's your only choice for forest damage. So that's kind of sad. So forest generally is in a really bad spot right now, and we are gonna see more of that later on as well, with forest being like in a really bad spot. But she's alright. She's alright. She's just, you know, the problem is she's limited. But as soon as another unlimited forest attacker comes along that is really good, she's gonna immediately become less relevant in my opinion. Unless that other force attacker is like too focused on area of effect damage, for example, because Swimsuit Mummy is, of course, single target, and that gives her something unique compared to, for example, an AoE attacker. Next up, we have Aina, who is absolutely powerful. You could argue that she should be in S tier, but in my opinion, somewhere between S tier and A tier. She's in a similar spot to Mifuyu, right? Where she's somewhere around top of A, bottom of S tier, in my opinion. Generally, she's gonna be very powerful because she's fully AoE, she has a follow-up attack, she gets stronger as the fight goes on, right? She can weaken enemies, which both makes them deal less damage to you and also take more damage, which is an extremely powerful debuff to have. But that's about it. And I say that's about even though that's really, really powerful. I think the main reason I'm putting her high is because specifically against bosses or lower amounts of enemies, she doesn't really do that much. And there are a lot of bosses where at some point you need to break the boss themselves, and Aina doesn't really help me with that. So as soon as there's a case where it's just one enemy that needs to be broken, Aina kind of can't really do that much, and you would much rather have a single target breaker instead. So she's not going to be great in all situations. Like, it needs to be a situation where there's going to be multiple enemies, where it actually makes sense for her to be area of effect. But the thing is, when it comes to bosses, even if it's a boss with multiple other enemies, once those other enemies are dead, there's only one boss left. So you always have a situation for a single target breaker to do something, is at least the way that I see it. But generally, like I said, you can also make the case for her being S tier. In my opinion, she is somewhere between the two. Next up, what do we have? We have Toka. Toka is a single target breaker who breaks decently quick, but that's about it. She doesn't really do that much for your team. She can't really synergize that well with other follow-up attackers because she only gets one follow-up attack every special, which doesn't happen that often. And while her break speed is good, it's not amazing either. So there are other attackers on the other breakers on the list, like Miffy, for example, who break like way faster, like absolutely way faster than Toka does, or that provide other things to the team. Like, for example, Mel, like I said, does take less skill points to use. In my opinion, not just my opinion, but if you play her correctly, she does take less skill points to use, which is really nice. And if you get Ascensions plus her EX, Mel actually gets a different rotation that is actually even more powerful than her regular rotation, which is pretty interesting. But Toka is kind of not very interesting, and she's just a single target firebreaker that doesn't really do much else. Like, she's missing the sauce, right? Toka is missing the sauce. And she also has a gimmick where you need to give her buffs, and if she doesn't have buffs on her, she actually becomes much worse. Which is kind of bad. For example, the enemy can reduce your buffs by like doing buff dispel. She immediately becomes much worse, and that's kind of sad that she needs to specifically have that gimmick satisfied, or else she becomes much worse. So that's kind of a problem with her. She's also much better as a support Kioku, which means that you're much more likely to actually use another breaker and then put her as the support Kioku. But that's actually a really good support Kioku. She's probably the one support Kioku for breaker that I use the most. Next up, we have Nemu, and okay, here's the problem with Nemu. Nemu is really high damage amplification for forest attackers. How many forest attackers do we have? Well, we have one in the bottom of B tier. Oops. That's kind of sad, right? If Nemu actually had a good standard forest attacker, like for example, if Sakurako was forest, then Sakurako would be B tier, and Nemu would be B tier. Sakurako would be A tier, and Nemu would be B tier, right? But since Sakurako is water type, and the only forest attacker we have is Swimsuit Mummy, who is limited and a lot of people don't even have, there's not much reason for Nemu to exist. Now, there is one thing that Nemu does, which is do damage over time stuff. But that's only really important when a boss specifically has a mechanic that says whenever you deal damage over time, or like ongoing damage as the game calls it, the boss gets weakened. But on any boss where that isn't the case, Nemu is entirely 100% useless. Because you're not going to have a forest attacker to buff unless you actually have Mummy, but even then you probably don't have that high ascensions. So if the boss is, for example, weak to forest and fire, well, your Momoko or your Kyoko might be ascension 4 or higher, so you're probably going to use them. And if you use them, then Nemu has no reason to exist. So there's just not many cases where you would even use a Nemu. And even when you do, just not even that important, right? Like when it comes, for example, for damage over time, there's another character I'm going to put into S tier that has damage over time on them. And in some cases, you can even use a Hana instead of a Nemu just to trigger the boss gimmick. of taking damage over time, because if you're not supporting a forest character, Nemu also doesn't really do that much either, right? Most of the damage amplification comes from supporting a forest character. Now she does get a lot better. She does get a lot better when she's Ascension 2. Ascension 2 helps her deal more damage to the enemy for the entire party. Like, she gives a damage amplification buff to the entire party, which is nice. But even so, it's just not good enough to really put her any higher, in my opinion. She's just entirely useless right now until we get a good unlimited forest attacker, and then she's gonna go a tier higher, maybe even top of B, maybe even go all, depending on how good that forest attacker is, maybe even up to A rank. But she's entirely dependent on being able to actually support a forest attacker. Next up we have, now you need to make sure I get the wrong, it's Tsukuyo. Tsukuyo is the breaker, and I think that Tsukuyo, where did I put her? Oh, I put her right here. So the thing about Tsukuyo is the following: she's a really good breaker. It's an AoE breaker that has a really good niche mechanic, which is being able to put actually some debuffs on the enemies, which means that if you have an enemy boss mechanic that says, oh, the more debuffs are on this enemy, the weaker they get, which there are some bosses that have that, then Tsukuyo can actually help out with that. For example, I think it's Tower 70, where the boss and the ads get weakened the more debuffs are on the enemy. And I think that boss is also Dark Weak, which means that Tsukuyo is actually the #1 choice for that boss. That boss is no longer there because Tower is closed right now. But Tsukuyo was the #1 choice for that boss, specifically because she is AoE breaker, because she gets to put more debuffs on the enemy, and she also synergizes with more debuffs being on the enemy. That said, because she does have this gimmick that needs to be satisfied, which is she actually gets most of her break bonus, or break depletion rather, from there being debuffs on the enemies. That means she needs to spend a turn herself applying the debuffs first, or have someone else apply the debuffs. And if there's not enough enemies or not enough debuffs to actually trigger all of her bonuses, that does make her break a lot slower, sadly. That said, there's also not that many bosses that are weak to dark, that aren't weak to another element with a better breaker, like weak to, for example, Void, and then you have Alina, or Light, and then you have Pluvia Madoka, for example. So there's not actually that many bosses where you would play a Tsukuyo. But that said, she is a decent choice for enemies that are Dark Weak, where you don't actually have someone else, and that are AoE, but like I said, it's not that many cases where you are playing her, but she's decent in those cases. Next up we have Tsukasa. Now Tsukasa is pretty darn good as well. By the way, I actually put her in the wrong one. She's B. Sorry. Did I put her in? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I misread that. Yeah, so you have Tsukasa right here, and Tsukasa is also having a similar gimmick where you put debuffs on the enemy, and then the more debuffs are on the enemy, the better things happen, right? But specifically with Tsukasa, the main important thing about her, which puts her apart from some other debuffers in the game, is the fact that she can cleanse buffs off of enemies, which is pretty darn powerful. Cleansing buffs is pretty darn powerful. Also another reason why Bohomina is really good, because you can also cleanse buffs. Now there are some bosses in the game that have extremely powerful mechanics that are based around their buffs, right? Now, a lot of bosses do have mechanics where they get those buffs from passives, like if they get it from their ability. Buffs from abilities cannot be cleansed, so your Tsukasa doesn't actually help with that, because if the buff comes from an ability, it can't be cleansed, sadly. But if the buff doesn't come from an ability, but instead comes from an active skill that the boss is using on its turn, then Tsukasa can immediately cleanse it. Because it's on special, that means you can immediately cleanse it when the boss uses the ability. So you might have a turn where the boss buffs itself really strongly, and then tries to immediately on the same turn use an attack, but when the boss does a turn with the buff, you can just immediately hit the special button on your Tsukasa, buff gets dispelled, and the boss looks like an idiot, caught with pants down in 4K. So that is what makes Tsukasa really, really powerful. And generally, he's also really good at amplifying damage for your light and dark type characters, and everything on area of effect damage. That's just really, really good to have on your debuffer. Next up, we have Mabayu, another S-rank character. So Mabayu is probably one of the top 3, maybe 4 best characters in the game, in my opinion. And that's because she kind of does everything. She both gives you more turns and also insane damage buffs. So the way that she works is she gives someone a double turn, which means that if the boss isn't broken, you give the double turn to your breaker, and then the breaker gets a double turn, and it gets to break twice at once, which maybe even gets the special, so they get the special twice as fast as well. And it just makes enemies break really fast, like absurdly fast, much faster than you can possibly ever think. Puzzles get broken immediately, right? So that by itself already means that she looks kind of amazing, because she's a buffer that makes enemies break really fast. In fact, I think she probably makes enemies break faster than having a speed buffer like Momura or Mami even. She's just that good. But then once the enemy is broken, you give the double turn to the attacker, which then also comes with insane buffs, like the best damage increasing buffs in the entire game. And then that attacker will hit for insane amounts of damage, like absurd amounts of damage. So because you can both make enemies break really fast, but then also give you absurd amount of damage for your attacker, and because she's buffer, once she reaches Ascension 4 means even stronger buffs, also means skill points back, which helps with her, because she's really skill point hungry, but that skill point hunger gets diminished by having the skill points back from her Ascension 4. Absolutely busted, absolutely absurdly powerful. That's why I put her all the way up there. Use her if you have her, just use her on every team. Next up we have Doppel Iroha. I'm gonna put her next to the healers, but probably, in my opinion, the worst healer in the game, because her heals really aren't that strong. And yeah, her buffs are strong, right? Like her EX gives her really good buffs, gives her, together with her regular buffs, gives her attack percent, gives her crit rate, which is really good. But because her heals are so bad, you often run into situations where you think to yourself, I need someone to keep the team alive. I'm gonna bring a Doppel Iroha because I also want buffs. Oops, everyone's dead. Whoops. That's not nice. Or you need to keep using skill points every single turn. Every single turn use a skill point to get the heals back up, and it feels like you're spending so many skill points on Doppel Iroha trying to heal the team that you're not actually getting to use your skill points and everything important. Now, the Crystalists help out a lot. If you have a good Crystalist setup with a lot of heal bonuses, right, that helps a lot. But even so, she's the one healer that I think heals the least, or even with all of the effort that I put into trying to make Doppel Iroha heal more, it always feels like it's just never enough to actually make her keep the party alive. And that's kind of sad. And now we've seen other healers that increase your damage, like your Mitama or your Swimsuit Madoka, that also increase your team's damage, that Doppel Iroha's damage buffs aren't really that special anymore, and because of that, I feel like she's probably the worst healer right now. Then we have Madoka, who is probably somewhere between bottom of S or top of A. Similar to Homura, she is a limited attacker, but at least she doesn't need to have ascensions as much as limited Homura. So that's the main reason why I would just barely put her in S tier instead of in A tier. But it is kind of close. You could also put her at power airing because she's limited, but unlike Homura, who has very special Ascension 4 with the crit rate buff that is so important that you can play a different build on her once she has that Ascension, with Madoka, that's not really a thing where her build is dependent on her Ascensions, and her second build after the Ascensions is like much more powerful, anything like that. Madoka is like a lot more solid, a lot more of a solid choice even at low Ascensions, so I think that kind of probably pushes her over the edge of being just barely S tier in my opinion. Overall a solid choice for an attacker, but because she's limited, it's a lot harder for her to get Ascensions. Keep all of that in mind. Next up we have Momura, who in my opinion is also all the way up there with the buffers. As one of the best characters in the game, gives you a crap ton of turns, an absolute fuck ton of turns, so many turns, oh my god. But the thing is, outside of giving you more turns, she doesn't really do that much, right? She doesn't actually do anything. Like, her damage buffs is almost non-existent. She only gives like a buff to special, which, yeah, theoretically for just, if you're thinking for example for score attack, could potentially make some attackers hit a tiny bit higher than other buffers because of the special attack buff just for the special, but even that is not really the case, I think. But you might say, oh, but she generates skill points for the party because she has this special magic stacks where if she reaches magic stacks, she generates skill points for the party, right? Except all of the skill points she generates, she needs to immediately use herself. She needs to use skill points more often than almost every single other buffer in the game. Only Mabayu uses more skill points than her, but outside of that, the other buffers don't need to use their buffs every single turn. Mami doesn't need to use it every turn, right? Depending on the rotation of your magic stacks, you might not need it to get to the next special or the next action advance. Or you just need to use it every turn. Tsuru doesn't need to use it every turn, right? Not every buffer needs to use the skill every turn. Momura, if you don't use the skill every turn, she doesn't do anything. So you immediately use the skill points you generate immediately back on her. So you're not actually, in most cases, you don't actually end up in the positive with her skill points. That's like Mabuyu does use more skill points, okay? Keep that in mind. So that is why, even though she sounds extremely powerful, more turns is all she does. It's just that more turns is extremely fucking powerful. So that alone puts it all the way up there. And of course, buffer A4, really good, really good. Then we have Sayaka, who in my opinion is probably around here. So regular Sayaka is a defender that, with high ascensions, actually does a really good job of keeping the party alive. At low ascensions, no. At low ascensions, Sayaka has the problem that most of her damage reduction has to be started up first with her magic stacks, right? She needs to gain magic stacks for her damage reduction to kick in. And before that, the team just dies. The team just dies on a lot of bosses before her damage reduction actually helps the people. But however, both her Ascension 2 and her Ascension 4 actually have passive damage reduction for the team, so that sort of evens that out and makes it so you have more time to actually get her stacks to keep the party alive. So especially at high Ascensions, she does actually have a really good job of keeping the party alive. But it is the reason why she's so high is because once you can keep the party alive, what you have is you have a sustain that might not need that many skill points to keep the party alive, depending on how strong your barriers are. That, and this is the important part, has a unique debuff that no one else in the game currently has, which is Resistance Shred, which is a 15% damage buff that just works at all times. And it doesn't get diluted with any other buff because, like I said, no one else in the game can do Res Shred right now, and it's a separate multiplier from every single other multiplier in the game. Watch the video on the damage calculation before this one for more information. But that by itself already means that she has a unique thing that no one else can, which is extremely powerful. And on top of that, she also has the special ability to, with her special, give you even more damage percent bonuses, right? Because her special actually gives you a damage buff as well. So as far as having a sustain that also increases your damage, no one's better than Sayaka. Sayaka is the sustain that gives you the most amount of bonus damage for being a sustain. No other sustain can do that. Like, for example, none of the healers can give you damage bonus, I think. So that's what makes her so good. But like I said, on low ascensions, she does struggle keeping the party alive. Keep that in mind. Next up, we have Momoko. Momoko is much better now than people gave her credit for, simply because she has ascensions now. Like at the beginning of the game, of course, if you just rolled a single Momoko, it might not be that interesting, right? But at higher ascensions plus, and this is the important part, EX Chrysalis. EX Chrysalis helps a lot. The main problem that Momoko faces in regular gameplay is that it takes her a long time to get to her special, because she has an increased MP cost for her special, and she doesn't have any way of getting more MP other than the normal amount of MP you get for your normal hits, which is really bad because it means it takes her a really, really long time to get to special. However, her EX Chrysalis gives her bonus MP on her skill. In fact, it gives her so much more bonus MP that she basically reaches special about as fast as everyone else. It also gives her more bonus damage, at least against the main target of her special, because her special hits 3 targets and you get bonus damage against the center target, which is good because in a lot of cases the center target is the boss, and that's the one target you want to take more damage. So that's great. And because of that, now she has her main problem figured out with her EX Chrysalis. And generally, it turns out that specifically at high ascensions, when you get Ascension 5, because the Ascensions, of course, give you more special level. At Ascension 5, you have special level 10. Special level 10, Momoko hits really, really hard, like absurdly hard on that special. Like, she has one of the highest damaging specials in the game, because she has so much special damage bonus. So yeah, that's extremely powerful. And because of that, she is extremely good. And because she's cleave, that means she is both good in single target and also good against 3 targets and also good against 5 targets. She's kind of good in almost all situations, and that makes her actually really, really good. The best fire attacker in the game, in my opinion. So Momoko, don't sleep on Momoko. It's also the main reason why Halloween Aina is down here. If it wasn't for Momoko, Halloween Aina might be C tier, maybe. But the thing is, Momoko is actually so good, while also being standard, that even against 5 targets, she performs overall better than Halloween Alina, even though Halloween Alina is AoE. So there really is no saving Halloween Alina, because even just Momoko is better. That's just the blunt reality. I'm sorry, guys. I'm a Arena fan myself. What am I supposed to say? So we have Reina. Reina, absolutely fantastic choice for breakers. There's not much to say about Reina because she breaks really fast because she gives herself action advance, and when the boss is broken, she can then push the boss's turns back when she gets her special when the boss is broken, which makes her really solid. You know, she doesn't do that much outside of that. She just breaks fast and then can push enemies' turns back. But what else do you need from a breaker? The number one thing you need from a breaker is breaking fast. She does that. She eats breakfast every single time, right? Because you break fast. So there's not much else to her, but that's kind of all you need from a breaker. Then we have Kaede. Kaede is a healer that kind of slots in with all the other healers. She has some unique advantages, but also some unique drawbacks compared to other healers. Her unique advantage is being able to cleanse ailments, which at the start of the game was very important because almost every single boss in the game had ailments that were really, really important on Nightmare mode, right? But ever since the release, they haven't introduced that many other bosses that have powerful ailments that need to be cleansed. So because of that, ailment cleanse has not really been that important at all. And most other healers, even though they don't have ailment cleanse, didn't really matter that much, right? Because it wasn't really that important. And if you take ailment cleanse away, what do you have? Well, you have MP restoration on her, except there's another system we're going to look at later that actually does probably even more MP restoration overall, across the entire fight at least, and does so passively as a sustain. So the MP restoration, I mean, it's nice, it's good, it's strong, right? But it's not unique, and it's, at least as far as the sustain slot is concerned, it's not even the best option for that. What else does she have? Well, she has a heal that hits only 3 targets. Oh, all these other healers heal all 5 targets. Now they heal less per heal because it's less concentrated. But as it turns out, most bosses in the game will like hit your entire team at once with such amount of damage that just healing 3 of them will just leave 2 other people to die. So that's kind of sad. Kind of the main drawback that Kaede has with only being able to heal 3 people when most bosses just hits everyone equally. So that's kind of puts a dampener on Kaede, and also the fact that she doesn't really have much damage increase. The only damage increase that Kaede gives to your team is the MP restoration, which, like I said, better choice out there. Next up we have Kioku. Kioku has the problem that Momoko exists, and Kioku is only good in single target against a boss that has at least 350% break bonus or more, because she specifically gets a break break multiplier bonus or whatever when the enemy has at least 350% break multiplier, and it has to be single target because she has no cleave of any kind. That means that she is a lot more restricted in the amount of bosses you can even play her on compared to Momoko. Momoko you can play on any fire boss, right? Any fire boss you can play her, it's fine. Kioku can only be played on some bosses, and in those bosses she only performs a bit better than Momoko, right? Like doing a bit more damage than Momoko on some of those bosses, I don't think is really that important compared to an attacker that is just good all the time. Even if in some of those cases it's slightly less good. That's why Kioku is probably not as high up in Momoko in my opinion. Next up we have regular Mami, who is one of the best characters in the game, specifically once you reach Ascension 2. She has maybe the most important Ascension 2 in the entire game, because with Ascension 2 she gains Momura's passive. She just gains that, which is the 20% speed bonus to the entire team. She just gets that. And once you reach Ascension 4, that speed bonus, by the way, also gets increased by the 50% from her Ascension 4, which is busted. On top of that, she also gains a crap ton of action advance forward, and between action advance forward and her special also granting an absurd amount of MP restoration bonus. That means your team will be spamming specials so much, like absolutely insane amount of specials. By just having Mami on the team, you will be really fast, you will get action advances, and on top of that, she also gives really good damage bonuses to the team. She's the buffer that does everything. She's the does everything buffer, and that by itself also means that she is all the way up there and has a top slot very easily. In my opinion, I like her a little bit more than Moemura, because once Mami reaches Ascension 2, she's similar to Moemura, also has the passive speed bonus plus the action advance, right? She actually becomes Moemura with Ascension 2, but on top of all of that has the MP restoration bonus and the way better damage buffs. Because of that, I believe that Mami is the better character than Moemura, especially if you have both at Ascension 5. I think Mami's buffs and bonuses that she provides to parties are just much better, while also providing a similar amount of speed and action advance than Moemura does. So that's why, in my opinion, Mami is easily the better character compared to Moemura. But not the best character in the game. We haven't gotten there yet, but you know which one it is. Moving on, we have Lux Madoka. It's like right there. I personally believe that, and this is not a joke, I personally believe that Halloween Aina is more useless than Lux Madoka. Because if you don't have Pluvia and you're fighting against a light type enemy, you would actually be using Lux Madoka. But there's no reason to ever use Halloween Aina, really, like ever. So, yeah, that's sad. Next up we have Pluvia Madoka. Pluvia Madoka has at times been the best character in the game, but I think she's fallen off. The reason why Pluvia has fallen off is, I mentioned this in another video, is because there's other breakers that have been released that break really, really fast. In fact, much, much faster than her. Like Mifuyu probably breaks like 3 times as fast overall compared to Pluvia Madoka. Like absurdly faster. Most other breakers in the game break faster than Pluvia, by the way. It's not because she breaks slow, it's just that they've released some breakers that just break really, really fast. That's just the way things have gone. And breaking is like the #1 things that breakers do. So not being on top of the game anymore as far as break speed goes has put a damper on Pluvia's relevance. On top of all of that, MP restoration is still really powerful, but they have released a couple of characters that have really high MP. For example, let's say you're playing Momoko. Momoko is really high MP. The MP restore isn't gonna change that much, sadly. Bo Homura has really high MP cost, so the MP restore from Pluvia being a flat amount doesn't help that much. They've also released other characters that can give themselves MP, like for example Ui. Ui gives herself MP. She doesn't need a Madoka to give her MP, she gives herself MP, right? So because of that, I feel like Pluvia's relevance has gone down a bit, but she's still really, really powerful and still one of the top characters in the game. It's just that I don't think she deserves to be in the top 3 anymore in most cases, simply because they're better breakers and MP restore less relevant. But still a top choice, still one of the top choices overall. Next up, Cool Homura. Cool Homura is probably the best attacker in the game, and the main reason for that is, well, she's standard. Already better than the other limited characters, for example. But on top of that, she is extremely good in area of effect, because in area of effect, like when I say area of effect, I mean like 5 targets. Against 5 targets, every single one of those targets could get broken on a separate turn, and whenever they get broken, Homura gets a follow-up, which does damage, but also gives her MP, because she gains bonus MP per follow-up, which means a grand total of at least 5 times you can do a follow-up attack, plus another 5, because once the enemy reaches max break bonus, you get another follow-up attack. It's like a bonus 100 MP plus 10 attacks that you can just get, but you have to stagger out the turns on which you break and get max break bonus, because you can only get 1 follow-up attack per turn. But if you can stagger them a little, you get so much out of that. And because her special is proximity, that means you can hit multiple targets. So in area of effect, like 5 targets, you can still hit 3 targets. You get bonus turns from that. Okay, they're not exactly bonus turns, but they're similar to bonus turns, where you just get turns faster, which means the more turns you get from her special means you can get more MP for more specials. So it kind of all feeds into each other, where the more enemies there are, the more follow-up attacks you get, the more MP you get, the more special you get, the more turns you get, the more MP you get, the more specials you get, the more turns you get. And it kind of all fits into each other, and you get like 10 Homura turns in a row, and then all the ads are dead, right? This is against 5 targets. Against 3 targets, you still get some of that, just to a lesser amount. But now, because of your proximity, you're hitting all targets at once all the time. And even if there's only a single enemy, her skill is not proximity. Her skill is single target. It means her skill actually does really, really high damage. And you can do things like skill into special into skill, which is an absurd amount of damage for someone to put out who also does extremely well against area of effect. She kind of does everything absurdly well. She's like good in every single situation, and that's what makes Cool Homura so absolutely busted. And there's no other dark attacker that can do anything to stand up to her, because the only other dark attacker choice we have is Holy Mummy, which does not do much damage and actually loses to a well-built Cool Homura against 5 targets. It's just that sad. Next up we have regular Iroha, a really decent choice for breaking. I did put her in A rank in my other thing that I did. I think I probably should put her next to Toka because she does actually break about as fast as Toka, while also having a similar drawback as Toka, being that she needs to first have a sort of condition that she needs to meet, being crit. You need to crit the enemy, because when you crit the enemy, you gain a bonus to your break gauge depletion, and if you don't crit the enemy, you don't get that break depletion, and you're just really bad. It's really bad if you don't have that buff. Now she gives herself 50% crit rate, and with Crystallis you can give even more crit rate, and her EX Crystallis also gives her more crit rate, so you can kind of make up for that, but it's still possible that you don't crit for like 2 turns in a row, and then your break speed goes to 0, and it's really, really bad. And outside of that, even if you do crit every turn and you keep that buff up, she only breaks about as fast as some other breaker choices, but not that much fast. Like, I don't think she breaks faster than Mel, I'm not quite sure. Definitely not as fast as Mifuyu. So she does have some drawbacks, and her break speed is only okay. It's not bad, by the way, it's not bad, but it's only okay. So that's why I think I would put it probably down there. Yachio is your best choice for a Aqua attacker. Not quite as versatile as some other attacker choices like Homura, for example. But that said, she crits absurdly high as far as score attack is concerned, or damage records on Chaos bosses, for example. She's your #1 go-to hero. There's a lot of Chaos bosses that are weak to Aqua, by the way, where you do the damage mission with Yachio, by the way. She's your #1 choice for that, so that's pretty good. But generally, she's overall a very solid character that gained a lot from Crystallis, because Crystallis gives you more crit rate and crit damage substats. She's also synergizes really well with just buffers being stronger, specifically with another buffer I'm going to bring up in a second. She just does really well overall. While she might not be very fancy, she just crits really high. The thing is, just critting really high by itself is just extremely powerful, and she's going to give you all the damage record you could possibly ever want, which is why she's overall just a really solid and great choice. Next we have Tsuruno, who I think some people might disagree with me, is I think also an S tier choice, but kind of at the bottom of S tier. Unlike the other buffers, it's not that she does many things really great, she just does one thing really good, and that is giving you more damage. Now, I said many things. Theoretically, Morimoto also only gives you more turns. It's just that more turns is just absurdly busted. But Tsuruno gives you only more damage, and it turns out that only more damage is really bad before the boss is broken. So that's kind of the main downside, that Tsuruno doesn't do anything when the boss isn't yet broken. And that's really sad. Now, the reason why I still think that she's an S tier despite apparently being useless before the boss is broken, which is really, really bad, is the fact that once the boss is broken, no one else other than maybe Mabayu buffs damage as much as Tsuruno does. He's probably the best damage buffer out there next to Mabayu when the boss is broken, so that is absolutely powerful. Secondly, being a buffer means Ascension 4 for buffer, giving bonus SP. It's really nice, right? But also, and this is probably where it becomes more important, there have been more characters released in the meantime that like critting, that want your team to crit. For example, Sakurako gains stacks for her passive, for her magic stacks, when someone on the team crits. Means Tsuruno is really good. Mifuyu specifically. Mifuyu gains MP and magic stacks whenever anyone on the team crits. Which means you put Tsuruno next to Mifuyu and you break absurdly fast. I kind of put it into words how extremely fucking fast Mifuyu breaks the boss if a Tsuruno is standing next to her. It's insane. And because of that, that means that Tsuruno has these special synergies that arise. For example, you can also put Tsuruno next to another character, Ren, and you then put both of those next to Mifuyu, and now your Ren follow-ups are also critting and giving Mifuyu MP and magic stacks, and it just all sort of feeds into each other, and it's really nice and synergizes really well with Yachio as well. Anytime you need crit, like anytime someone benefits from having crit on the team, Tsuruno is your #1 choice, because she gives the team like 67.5% crit rate or something at Ascension 5, like to the entire team. Absurdly powerful. So that's why I think she's still absolutely worthy of the S tier spot. Next up we have Sana, who I think is the one defender that isn't in S tier. It's actually kind of far down a bit. And the main reason for that is that her shields last for 2 turns and she doesn't do much else, right? So we have other defenders like, for example, Sayaka giving you that insane damage increase to the team. And Sana, yeah, sure, she gives you some crit rate, but only a little bit of crit rate, and that's it. That's just not good enough, right? Like, Sayaka's damage buffs are way, way more potent than Sana's little bit more crit rate. And on top of all of that, like I said, her barriers lasting 2 turns mean they run out really, really easily on characters that are really fast, specifically because Sana herself is really, really slow. She's one of the slowest characters in the game, so it takes a really long time to refresh the shields that then run out almost immediately. Now, Sayaka's barrier also lasts 2 turns, but her EX Chrysalis gives her another turn duration for her barrier. So with EX, Sayaka's barriers do actually last 3 turns. So that's one thing that Sayaka has over Sana. And yeah, outside of that, Sana doesn't do anything. She just has bad shields that run out fast and gives you a little bit of crit rate, and that's it. Right? Theoretically, you have the damage reduction from her special, and she can heal herself, and the more you crit on Sana, the more defense the team gets, but it's all just bonuses that don't really make up the difference in what she's lacking, sadly. Like, all of those like defense buffs and damage reduction buffs still don't make up for the fact that if someone's barrier runs out just before the boss attacks, they're gonna get clapped. So that's really, really sad. That's next up we have Felicia. So Felicia is really, really good in PvP, but outside of PvP she does absolutely fucking nothing, because every single enemy in the game, outside of like standard difficulty and battler difficulty, every single enemy in the game, even like regular enemies, have like 100% stun resistance, which is really bad. Now, in PvP, she's really good, but even in PvP, there have been like way better strats that don't even use Felicia, so she's falling off in PvP. In PvE, everyone's stun immune, so she's kind of out of a spot in a way. And now she can still be effective in PvP, but as time goes on, more and more people are going to drop her from the teams. That's kind of the way it goes. Now, outside of that, theoretically, she has a decently high attack and some bonuses where she maybe can do some damage, but there's way better choices for debuffer dealing damage, and also just generally there's not much of a need anymore to have a debuffer dealing damage. When you, for example, for dark type, there's cool Homura around the corner, like there's no real reason to have a Felicia, and her damage amplification that she gives to the team isn't really that high either. Like, other debuffers give you more damage amplification, so Felicia's only really good gimmick is stun, which, like I said, is dropping off in PvP, and in PvE everyone's immune, so sorry Felicia, there's not really much use for you anymore. Then we have Ren, who's the best character in the game. I made an entire video where I talked about why Ren is way too overpowered. Watch that video. That's all I have to say. Oriko is having troubles because, well, as far as light type goes, of course, you have Madoka right here, who just performs better in most cases, but the thing is, the only thing that Oriko can do is area of effect, and as far as area of effect against like 5 enemies is concerned, she's decent, but that's about it. Like, being good, but not even great and fantastic, but only good at area of effect damage is kind of the only thing she has to her name. And as soon as enemies die on the enemy side of the team, her damage goes down by a lot, and when it's just the boss left, she doesn't really do that much anymore, which is a really big problem that other specifically specifically area of effect characters have to struggle with, which is that once enemies die, your damage dies too, and that's a really big problem to have. And even when there's multiple targets, it's not like Oriko is immediately killing everything all at once. She still can struggle against multiple targets sometimes if it's really strong enemies, so Oriko is kind of struggling a bit. Who is not struggling is her wife, Kirika, who is up there as one of the best characters in the game. It's probably better than this one, I'm not quite sure. So the thing that Kirika, no, actually maybe here. So Kirika is extremely powerful defender as well. In my opinion, her relevance has also dropped a little bit. Kirika is probably the best character in the game for keeping your team alive. The reason why that is that she not only has passive damage reduction as part of her ability, but more importantly, her special is one of the best specials in the game, because it does both 25% attack reduction, which is insanely strong. 25% attack reduction is absurdly powerful at making the enemies deal less damage. On top of all of that, speed reduction, 25%, the absolute speed reduction, really speed reduction. That's fucking powerful. The fact that they gave this much speed reduction to someone in the release roster, I think was a mistake, because speed reduction is one of the most powerful debuffs you can put on an enemy. Because the only way that enemies in most cases have to deal damage to your team is if they get a turn. Not to mention when they get broken, how long it takes for them to get out is dependent on their speed. So you can just keep your team alive by just making enemies both deal less damage and take less turns, but then you also have barriers that last 3 turns and are decently powerful, and also have passive damage reduction. So she has everything you could possibly ever want on a character to keep the team alive, right? She easily has the easiest time out of any sustain to keep the entire party alive, especially once she reaches Ascension 4, because her special is just way too overtuned. They should not have made her special this powerful, but it's too late now. They cannot cork that anymore. Her special is just now one of the best specials in the game. That's just the way it is now. Now, what else does she have? Well, I mentioned this earlier, but her just having a barrier on team, which, like I said, she only needs to use her skill once, and then you have 3 turns of barrier, which often means that you can use skill, and then when your turn comes around, you can use a normal attack, because the barriers are still lasting for a while, and then only use skill again on the next turn, which means that you doesn't need to use a skill every turn in most cases. Especially when the enemy is so slow and does so little damage that a barrier doesn't even break. So yeah, you can just have the barrier on for a really long amount of time, and while the barrier is on, everyone generates a lot more MP, which I think across an entire battle still overall comes out as more MP being generated than Kaede, who has to use her skill all the time and has to use her special not to weaken the enemy but to just give everyone MP. So overall, Kirika just has kind of everything. She's one of those package deals, does everything. And she does everything really, really well. It's like, you can't go wrong with having an A5 Kirika on any team, right? Now, the reason why I'm saying that her relevance is dropping off a tiny bit is because as far as just increasing damage goes, Sayaka actually does a better job at increasing everyone's damage, right? That's why I think that Sayaka is really good up there as well, because she can just increase everyone's damage so well. And if you can keep the team alive with a Sayaka instead of a Kirika, then you could just use the Sayaka and get the damage bonus. And then suddenly Sayaka looks more important than Kirika for a second, and that's really good to have in there. And as far as that goes, I think we're done, because I'm not going to rank the 4 stars and 3 stars. It's kind of a waste. So that was that. Is there anything else left that I want to say? Well, here's the thing. I mentioned this earlier with Nemu. Some of these characters are in lower tiers because either they have characters that do the same but better. Like, for example, when you have Swimsuit Sayaka and Yachio being better damage dealers than Sakurako, that means the Sakurako is a bit lower, right? For example, or when you have breakers that break much faster than other breakers, then of course those breakers would be higher. Especially if that breaker, like Mifuyu, has bonus other things they do, like the crit rate increase that she does for your team, that makes you higher. But also sometimes characters are missing a partner. Characters sometimes need to play off of other characters that just don't exist right now, or that are just not relevant right now. So there might be movement in these tiers. If, for example, like I said, a forest attacker gets announced that's really good, suddenly Nemu is way higher tier, right? So that means that this tier list is only for as it stands right now, and could change at any time in the future. It changes with every single boss that gets released, the tier list changes. Every time a new character gets released, the tier list changes, right? And also, this is just my personal opinion, right? This is just what I think currently. And I also want to mention that I think that even from top of S to bottom of B, the difference in power level is not as drastic and dramatic as it might appear to some people. And I also want to shout out that a lot of characters are in S and A. Like, S and A combined is most of the characters. Because I think that overall, the game does actually have a pretty decent balance. Like, I think the game is actually pretty decently balanced in most of its characters. So I don't think to say that you need to only be using S tier characters, or that S tier characters are like way better than everyone else. Like, no, that all these characters are actually pretty close in power level. But yeah, that was that. If you watched all of this, then thank you so much for watching all of that. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, become a member today, and I'll see you guys next time. Also, shout out to my members, Chai Bean, Rip Van Winkle, and Simpletor. Thank you very much.